Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam in Life with me, Reza Kazim. The characterization of Muslims into different categories has long been the working practice of the colonizer. The colonized might well have varied in terms of their religion or country of origin, but the need to control the narrative has helped in controlling the people.
Good Muslims are peaceful, law-abiding, and abhor acts of violence that threaten the authority of the secular Western state. Bad Muslims commit acts of violence and, according to political leaders like George W. Bush and Tony Blair, blaspheme the name of Allah and do not adhere to the proper teachings of the Quran. Deeper interpretation of this formula in the West: bad Muslims are those who do not adhere to the concept of accepting victimization and thus take action to change their situation, as opposed to waiting to be rescued by the West. While this is the Western definitions of good and bad Muslims, is there an alternative view? Is there any other perspective of defining good and bad Muslims? Is it even fair and constructive to define Muslims as such? Surely Muslims who can act against injustice and contribute to their societies while maintaining their dignity can simply be identified as Muslims, period.
We're honoured to be joined by our esteemed guest, Professor Tariq Ramadan, to discuss all of these issues. Welcome to the programme, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. The introduction talked about good and bad Muslims and a lot of almost crude points being made in the way that it was talking about it. You know, what do we mean by that? Why does it even come about in this way?
I think that what you said in your introduction, it's very important. Here we are talking about the power of language and the narrative. Who is deciding, who is defining, who is categorizing. So we have here the reality of the powerful, something that we knew under colonization. Very often the good were the people accepting to be colonized and the bad were the people resisting. So, and once again, up to what was happening in Taliban, the United States supporting people, they were freedom fighters, and the same very people that then were labeled as terrorists, the Taliban, who were supported. So we need to know this, and and this is the starting point of what I would call, in Islamic term, an intellectual jihad. And the intellectual jihad is to reclaim for ourselves our terminology and our definitions. Power is language, and we have to know how to deal with this, because at the end of the day, as it was said in the clip, as you introduced the topic, the liberation within the Muslim communities and Muslim majority countries comes with a clear understanding of what we mean when we are speaking about Muslim. So first is Muslim, and it's not good and bad. Now we have different categorizations, and we have different, we need to have a typology, for example, of those people, and in which way, what are we talking about? Are we talking in theological term? Are we talking in political term? What are we talking about? That's the starting point of the discussion.
And with regards to the points that you're making about whether it's an Islamic definition or this Western definition, what kind of language and how would you want to reclaim that language? Where would that direction go with this?
I would say it's even more complex than that. It's not a Western definition versus a Muslim definition, because even among Muslims you have some Muslim or so-called states, and Islamic State are saying who are the good Muslims, the silent, the people who are following fatwa coming from shuyukh or Muslim authority, completely subservient to the state. So we need to know that it's also an internal struggle. It's not only facing the West. So having said that, what we need to do I would say at an academic level as well as a political level, we need both. Something which is more the normative definitions and something which is the political ideological understanding. And the normative is to go further than that and to refuse from the starting point anything which has to do with a binary definition, the good and the bad. This is the colonial mind. So this is to differentiate and to divide between two, and to rule and to play one against the other. No. Yeah.
But sorry to interrupt, but some would say that this is very much part of that idea of haqq and batil, and the good and the falsehood and so on. How would you respond to that?
I would say that this is not, for us, when we are talking about Muslim, what al-haqq al-batil is within Islam, outside Islam. So of course that we have to accept that there is something. So we have people who have nothing to do with Islam. We have some, we have trends, for example, the big question about some trends when they are saying, for example, there is a prophet after the prophet, the Ahmadiyya, for example. The consensus among the Muslims is this is not an accepted diversity, this is outside. So al-haqq, which is what is acknowledged, and there is a diversity here, and what is not. So this is outside. Now when it comes within, it's not about bad and good. It's much more complex than this. So we need to know what we are talking about. For example, in the legal field, we have schools of law. In the Sunni and in the Shia tradition, different schools of law, and we are accepting. We have schools of thought. In our tradition, we had sciences, for example. So you have people who are putting the authority in philosophy, others putting the authority in the legal field, others who are putting the authority in the mystical trends, so the Sufi. So you have different things. And you have trends. More than that, you have trends. Rationalist, reformist, literalist, all these. So it's much more complex than that. So you cannot say good and bad. In every trend, in every school of thought, of law, there is what right things, and there are things that are disputed. Now, the question here is a normative typology responding to that typology coming from the West, or the typology coming from powerful people within the Muslims saying the good are following us and the bad are resisting us. So this is one thing. And then you have to come to the political definitions of Muslims here. Because you can be of all these trends, and you can be a token Muslim, you can just support the states, whatever the state is doing, and you have positioning here of people speaking the truth, speaking their mind, working for the liberation of the oppressed. So this is where I would say these are the good Muslims and the people who are understanding that as a Muslim there is one principle which is not disputable, and it has to be a consensus. When you face the oppressor, you have to speak out. And this is where the oppressors are going to call you the bad, but you know that you are the good.
And in terms of the problem that we have with this kind of definition, what impact does it have on society to start with?
That's very important. In specific time, such as what we are witnessing now. You go to, for example, recently I traveling to North American countries, for example, in the States or in Canada, here in Europe, but not only, in Muslim majority countries. When you are labeled, this is where you know if the powerful or the governments are going to talk to you and to give you some credibility. So they are going to ask you in the media, in the government, if you are labeled as the bad, you are going to be suspicious, you are going to be suspected, you are going to be targeted. And this is what is happening. So for example, when you speak the truth to the government, you can be banned from a country. You can be stigmatized, for example, and you can end up, for example, if today, as a Muslim, as a Western Muslim, you go and you support financially the Palestinian resistance, you end up being on the blacklist. You end up being suspected of supporting terrorism. So all these words are very important because they can destroy your life. And this is why Muslims, Western Muslims, but also African Muslims, Arab Muslims, Persian Muslims, whoever, we need to be very clear. If we want to resist this categorization of the good and the bad, we need to be courageous. And we need to be at least clear with our own definition. Reclaiming the intellectual jihad means it's not for you to define who we are. It's for us in scientific terms, in political terms, in social terms, and this is the way it has to be.
And in terms of what kind of an impact does this have, these definitions that have been created and formalized in society. What do they have on the internal Muslim narrative? How do they impact on that? How do they manifest themselves? What happens with that?
You know, between you and me, when we speak about this, say, okay, this is done by governments and states. But when you deal with Muslims at the grassroots level, you know it has an impact. You know that the powerful have always an influence in the way Muslims are going to. You know, at the very moment, we were unhappy with Tony Blair in the UK, with what he was doing, following in the footsteps of George W. Bush and all their lies. I saw the leadership of Muslims 1 hour before he entered the room, criticizing him when he entered the room, just trying to shake his hand and just to be with you and to take a picture. When you see that this has an impact on the leadership of the Muslims, you say, yes, it has an impact. In front of the powerful, before the powerful, when you have to deal with them, people are losing their principles, the people are losing their minds. So I think that it's very important to get it right. So we might talk about courage and resisting, but when it comes to dealing with power, it has an impact with the leadership, and it has the reality with the Muslim communities. The Muslims today are in a state in many countries where they are scared because of this psychological pressure. So this is where we need to understand that we need to liberate ourselves by labeling and calling ourselves the way it should be.
There are some points that perhaps we can delve into a little bit further. We do like to keep this show as interactive as possible and really value your opinion. Here is what you sent us this week.
This week we asked, why is the Western definition of good Muslims and bad Muslims problematic? Hamza from France said, it is problematic because it means that any Muslim who challenges the Western way of thinking is not a good Muslim. This cannot be correct. Mardi from Canada said, dividing good and bad Muslims in the West is a political gimmick. There are good and bad people everywhere, and they cannot always be defined by their religious beliefs. And Zubida from Australia said, it is problematic because it is full of political innuendos. If you, for example, speak against oppression that is opposed by the West, you are a good Muslim. But you do the same for causes supported by the West, such as the occupation of Palestinian land, you become a bad Muslim. It's all double standards.
Generally, we are all human beings and we should not generalize things. I think sometimes the media portrays a different image of people and stereotype it. I think that's going on a lot at the moment.
We don't have the right, I personally believe, as a human being, to judge who is a good and a bad Muslim. God has the right.
You find the good elements in all walks of life. Muslims, Christians, Hindus, whatever you have, you all have the good elements and the bad elements. And unfortunately, we are projected as the bad people.
There is a problem with every community and every human being in the world because you always find good people and bad people everywhere. It's not about just the Muslims, it's about every religion, you know. But the thing is, it's whatever is going on in the world at the moment, because this is the thing, because we just like a trademark.
That's all the comments we have for this week. If you'd like to have your views featured in the show, be sure to follow us on Facebook or join us on Twitter.
One of the things that I want to pick up on is the point that was made about how political innuendo works and how that actually works against the Muslims. What do you say to that in terms of, again, going back, linking it with the point that you were making about the impact on the Muslim community and how they internalize some of these problems? Yeah. What would you, how do you think those things link up?
No, I think once again, as it was said, it's a game between power and citizens. And it was always like this. By the way, the fact that you speak about bad and good is not only with Muslims, it's almost with all the citizens, the people who are resisting. And
that point was made in the video by a clip in a couple of times.
Yes,
people.
Exactly. So that's something which is important. And then it depends on the time. And sometimes the labels could change. Remember, Muhammad Ali in the United States of America, he was understood as being a betrayer, a traitor to the country. And then when he passed away, he was the best, and the same with Mandela, and the same with so many. So these labels are important. We need to deal with this. But once again, the problem is that we cannot sit down and blame the people to be attracted by power and to react to this, because the pressure is very high. What we have to do is that, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to help the people to face power and also to face their own tradition by being able to say something about it? So for example, as it was said in the clip, it's for us to decide who is the good and who is the bad. So what is a good Muslim is understanding the message, the ethical stance, being on the side of the oppressed. There are here categorizations that we can make. So we need to go for more education, and we need to know, to go for more understanding of the political game, how it works, how power is instrumentalizing this categorization in order to set a specific agenda. This is where we need to be committed as citizens to deconstruct the whole structure of this categorization.
And the other point that was being made in there was that this idea that if you challenge, and this is something that you touched on earlier as well, that if you challenge the Western narrative, then you're going to be seen as the bad Muslim, as a person that is a problem.
Exactly, yeah.
And again, how do you counter that narrative in terms of, because one of the things that's going on is the impact that's having on the Muslim community, and the fact that they become almost powerless in front of power.
Yeah.
How do you strengthen the resolve of the Muslim community to say, look, you've got to stand up? How do you create that?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge one thing. You have some leaders who are very much seduced by anything which has to do with power. But we have also the opposite at the grassroots level. That we have to put our trust as believers in God, but also in the community. There is a saying by the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying that this community is not going to agree on something which is wrong. So very often our community and our brothers and sisters in Islam, when they see that somebody is accepting to play with power, or the power instrumentalizing, they react, they don't follow. So it's also something which is important. So you have a following there that is also a balance, that they feel that there is something wrong, and we feel that there is something wrong. So we have to rely on this, direct, immediate psychological reaction to people who are so quickly put as, good Muslims, or because some of the good Muslims that we have now in the media in Europe are ex-Muslims. So the good is an ex. The good Muslims is no longer a Muslim in some of this rhetoric that we have. And the Muslim community, or the Muslim communities, are not following. They get the message. So we need to work on this. It should not be only emotional. It has to be more structured, and then to tell the people, look, when people are trying to play with us, what is the way towards our liberation? It's about knowledge, it's about resisting, it's to be the voice for the voiceless. And once again, we have to reconcile the Muslims with humility when it comes to God, and courage when it comes to human beings.
They may not follow and recognize that what the people, the community leaders, etc., are being seduced by power, but it does have an impact on the Muslim community. That they still internalize that narrative because those people that have not delivered on their responsibility as leaders. So how do you get the Muslim community to not just recognize that there is a problem, but also do more than that?
Yeah, you are very right. I think it's important, because sometimes it's just an emotional reaction. They feel that it's not right, but at the end it still has an impact on them. So this is why we need education. We need to work at the grassroots level, and we need to reconcile two things. It's the religious teaching. It's important, because this is why you are going to say, okay, look at the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the way he was. He was the embodiment of the good Muslim, and he never kept quiet. He was
not. He wouldn't be seen like that by the Western powers, I'm sure.
He would be a bad Muslim, by the way, for sure, and he was. In fact, he was. So that's clearly the case. So we can build on understanding the message through the example of the messenger, peace be upon him. But we also need to connect this with a political awareness. A political awareness. The problem that we have with many Muslims, in Muslim majority countries, as well as in the West, is that they don't study political, forces, how it works, and they are very often exposing themselves to the media or to the governments in a way which is no clear awareness, no clarity in the sense. So we need political education. We need civic education. We need that. We need to let the people, when you have, positioning based on ethics, you need to know how it works. Conscientious objection means something. So it's not only good to praise Muhammad Ali for what he did, but to understand in which way, if you are serious about your principles, you have to be committed.
And one of the things that is, I suppose, going on down the religious track, that one of the contributors to the clip said earlier, that you don't have the right to judge. It is only God who has the right to judge. What would you say to that kind of...
Yes, I think he has a good point, by the way, because there are two different levels. When it comes to the good and the bad, on who you are, no one can. We have in the Quran, عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ وَعَلَيْنَا الْحِسَابِ. You spread the message, this is said to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and God only will judge. That's as who you are. Now, what you do, I have the right to say something. And here we are talking about your political commitment. So out of your, for example, pleasing the powerful, I can say no. I have the right to say that this is bad. So we have to be very cautious when it comes to the being, and this is what he meant. When it comes to the being, when it comes to anyone, only God can judge. But when it comes to our social commitment, social involvement, political positioning, of course we have the right, and we have to have a judgment on the people who are betraying and the people who are sacrificing in the name of their principles. So we have clear categories when it comes to the behavior, and we have to do that.
And in terms of the internal processes, the internal normalization of this terminology within the Muslim community, how does that need to be dealt with in terms of the children that are growing up? Because that's something that's seen by them on a regular basis within schools, within everything that's put forward to them. So they are immersed in that culture. So there's one thing about the elders, the leaders, and so on. But what about the children? What do you do there?
I think that once again, what we were saying about educating the community, the parents, and educating the children, it's very important that we have to do this. So I would say that when we are in the West, and even sometimes depending on the country, we have to do exactly the same. We need to question the terminology. We need to question, for example, when the people are talking about radicalization, when they are talking about violence, for example, and putting in the same box these people in Daesh that are killing innocent people, and the legitimate resistance, for example, in Palestine. These are the same people who say violence is violence. No, we can't do this. So I think that as parents, as leaders, as a community, there is a need to deal with the definition of the concepts, but also a clear understanding of who we are and who among us are doing the good things and who among us are betraying the principles and, in fact, the community.
Lots of interesting points. The parameters of acceptability of the Islamic identity of Muslims are part of the policy-making process of the Western establishment. The problem is further compounded by the fact that Muslims have accepted this language or been pushed into using these parameters as the norm. The language of discourse is framing the way that not only society views Muslims, but also how Muslims view themselves. That's all the time we have today. I would like to thank First Tariq Ramadan for joining us, and I thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.